can we ask you please, if you could, seeing as we're quite an intimate group so far, would you mind joining us closer to the front so that this is quite an intimidating separation of people here, so please help us by drawing nearer. It will also make the pictures look better, which was not our primary focus, of course. Yeah, sure. We need to finish on time, but we'll just start at 5 past, just to give people a few more minutes, because there's always extraordinary rushing around between sessions. I'm now regretting having passed off my ice cream. Oh, this is not how I hope to draw people to the panel. Well, here we'll be preaching to the choir. I should have done it out on the street. Okay, it's just a couple more minutes to 5, and then we'll start. You guys will sort. Okay, we each have a mic in this room, which is good. Okay. So assuming that it might just take people a few minutes to roll in, let's just start with those of you who are here. Thank you. I hope that means you raced from whatever other session you were in. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Eliza Anyangwe. Please, as you come in, seeing as we're such a small group, please do join us closer to the front. And if it is no inconvenience to you. You're attending the session that I think is the best of the lot, but biased perhaps, called Can Journalism Make Society Kinder? And the panel was really born of the idea, of course pitched before recent events such as Christchurch, but born of the idea that what is important in journalism, what we seem to be focusing on, is business models and sustainability, and all of those things are important, and newsroom transformation, etc. But somewhere before we get to all of that is the question of what is journalism for, and what are we trying to do, and what is our role within societies, particularly as various types of content, both in traditional sort of respected platforms and in tabloids, are being accused of sowing discord and division in society. So we're not going to focus specifically on fake news, because there are lots of other sessions talking about facts and fake news. We're going to think about the other roles that journalism and journalists have to play, if we do agree that we have a role to play in the types of societies that we have. My name is Eliza. I'm a journalist. I used to edit at The Guardian. I now split my time between a platform I've set up myself called the Nzinga Effect, focusing on African women's stories, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Joining me to share their perspectives, which I was very glad to hear about what these guys are doing. I hope you will find it interesting and inspirational as well. So I'll start with my immediate left. Roohi Hasan is a senior producer, is that right? I hope I'm going to remember everyone's titles now that they're not in the program. Little test. At ITV News in the UK. Next to her is Philip Faigle. I never asked you how you said your surname, is that right? Faigle. Okay.
It's very German.
Yes, I'll leave that to you. Who works on the Germany Talks program at Zeit Online. He can tell you more about what that is and his role specifically. And then last but not least is Ubaud, who is at Helsingin Sanomat. And she is, managing editor. And so each of these people were approached because their roles in their organizations and the way they see their organizations is really about helping to do something far more comprehensive than just report stories. But we'll put that question to them. Guys, starting with you perhaps, since you're right to my left, Anu. I'm sorry, Roohi. Do you think journalism can make society kinder? And if so, how are you trying to do that within your own organization?
That would be really helpful. You can tell I'm the producer and not the reporter. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to Eliza for inviting me. I thought it was a great title because I think sometimes when we're all so busy doing our day job, we forget sometimes about the reason maybe that, for me, why did I get into this career? One of the reasons is, it's, in a word, yes is the answer to your question. I do believe journalism can make society kinder. It's one of the reasons that I got into this career. As a young person, I wanted to shine a spotlight on stories that weren't being told, something that could help people in a positive way. And believe me, over the years, at times where I'm sure those of us in the media know when the media is presented as the bad guy often, if I didn't truly believe in it being a positive force, I don't think I would have continued going in this career, and particularly often after certain events. You mentioned New Zealand. Eliza, I had an incident a couple of weeks ago when New Zealand happened. I was filming for a piece to do with the actual story on the global and the UK-wide reaction, and I was filming at a mosque, and it was a day when probably a lot of us woke up to the news. Well, in the UK we did, and was quite shocking and upsetting, and yet someone came up to me and started filming me and said, "You're responsible for all the deaths there, aren't you?" And whilst attacks from friends, strangers, even family at times for what I do, I'm used to. Sometimes because part of what I do is also I go and talk in communities around the country, getting young people from communities that may not always join the media to join it. This was quite affronting, and on a day when you're quite upset yourself, to be then accused of it was quite affronting. But the reason I link it to the answer to this question is that I actually think that it's in that same note that he believed that day when he was upset or whatever, that bad rhetoric or rhetoric in its own way had contributed to the events or the influences that led to whatever happened in New Zealand. I believe in that same way, conversely, journalism can be a force for the better. And I just think that, there are ways, as Eliza said, that we've been working on that in our own ways, and I wanted to just give you some example. For myself, it's fallen into sort of various categories, but it's covering stories more responsibly, more sensitively, and at the heart of it, putting people at the heart of our coverage, which I'm sure is something that most of us try and do as journalists. For me, it's been covering as diverse a range of stories as possible, and by diversity, I mean colour, faith, as a minimum, but also age, social mobility, geography, disability, across the board. Diversity is everything. It is a disability as well. It's trying to represent people's views and opinions. And also tied to this, I work and have been working over the years on trying to create a more diverse newsroom, because I believe that the more diverse our newsroom can be, the more representative then we can try and be of the audience and the readership out there. Obviously, I'm only in broadcast, so I can speak only from that point of view. And why do I think this is important? It's not just a tick box exercise, but it's about presenting a wide array of opinions. And that can only enhance and better our coverage. It can make it more accurate, it can make it fairer, it can make us more in touch with our audiences, and it can make us, at a time where obviously I think everyone would want to grow our audiences, not lose our audiences. We're very lucky at ITV News. We've kept a steady audience. We're seeing a growth in our audience, but it's something that we never want to take for granted. And I think that's really, really important. And especially at a time where people fear the unknown, people fear their own communities. We have seen, a rise since Brexit, since various, the rise in the far right in the last few years, of people fearing the unknown, fearing certain communities, fearing refugees. These are some of the pieces that have helped. Just some examples quickly. A piece that I did when I was covering the Syria crisis, which looked at refugees, refugees coming here. One of the pieces I did from out there, I noticed we ended a piece looking at children dying over a week. And I decided to show the number of children who died as a roll call for the dead. And that had the effect of one of the viewers contacting and just writing as a comment. We had an extraordinarily positive response to that. They were shocked, they were upset, but one of them said, I now understand why people might be risking their lives to get into boats to cross and come to Europe. And it was just seeing 26 children's names, including newborns, just scrolling up. And it was just putting faces and names to the people that are dying, making people realize that they share values. So often, sorry, I realize I'm going over, something else that we do a series called Inspiring Britain. It's where we showcase heroes and heroines from across the country. One of those was a woman who happened to be disabled, and she was aspiring to be in the Paralympics, but she also happened to be female, she happened to be Muslim, she happened to be a headscarf wearer, at a time when a recent statistic said that a Cambridge University study said that for every one moderate Muslim mentioned in the press, there are 21 examples of extremists. I think it's really important to focus also on positive stories and tell stories of individuals, of ordinary people, and show that whether it be, I cover disabled people, I cover injured soldiers, I cover those people with mental health stories. It's to just show that everyone may be suffering in the same way, and to just be able to make sure that that comes across to our audiences.
Thank you. There's a lot in there that we can unpack. Hopefully you have lots of questions. We're going to try and go to the floor much sooner perhaps than you might do on other panels. Can we just ask what can you show the slide, please? Then it will be matched with, I can then ask the next speaker to go, okay, Anu, you're up. So that the two match.
Okay, hi all, I'm Anu Ubaud. I'm the managing editor of Helsingin Sanomat, which is the leading national newspaper in Finland. So.
Sorry, Anu, just to interrupt you, sorry, because I know lots of people have come in while Roohi was talking. I'm just asking our speakers to answer the first question, which is, can journalism make society kinder? And if they think it can, what does that look like from their own organization, so that you know the context in which Anu is speaking?
Yeah. Okay, so we are a newspaper turning 130 years this year. And we stand for three core values, which are freedom of speech, equality, and the truth. And these are also values that we actually communicate to our audience, to the readers, and that we base our content and all our acts on these values. So for answering this question, I think I look at the question from the point of view of the Nordic countries, and what does it mean making society kinder or better? I think it's kind of core task of the media, and by kinder I mean the core task of the media is opening up worlds and realities to the people that they wouldn't access otherwise. So widening like the understanding of how people think, how different people think and act, and why. So. We don't have the political division between Finnish people is nothing as wide as in the US, for example, but it's there. So we are also divided by the questions of immigration, environmental stuff, politics, equality, all these things. But from the point of view of the Nordic welfare states, it's like the welfare states are based on the common willingness to care for others and willingness to pay taxes in order to get the same amount of good for everyone. So I think if the division of the people goes wider, it also will have impact on how we think about the welfare state, and it can have some severe impact on the welfare state. So I'm just, I will show you some of the like kind of acts we have done in the society for the past year, meaning this year and last year. So let me start. You probably don't understand the words, but there's our white front page that we launched on the International Women's Day last year, and we declared that we committed ourselves in increasing the percentage, the amount of women being presented by us. So that was that I will later talk more about it, but it's kind of ongoing process, and the readers can follow it on everyday basis, so they see the percentage of women in our front page, digital front page every day, and they can see how the challenge is going for us. Above the front page are ugly Christmas sweaters that we did last year. So we picked up the biggest news of the year 2018, and since the big news are almost always ugly, we turned them into ugly Christmas sweaters, and we then gave them as a present to powerful people, to wise people, and asked for solutions and what should we do about this. These are obviously dealing with an environment and climate change, and then the Me Too movement, and then there were others like technological manipulation, plastic in the oceans, and the wars. And then the big picture, Mr. President, welcome to the land of free press, was our big campaign last year when Putin and Trump met in the summit in Helsingin. So we basically rented 300 billboards along the 3 possible routes that they could drive from the airport to the meeting point. And we covered them with actual headlines from Helsingin Sanomat that we had published during past years. And it grew out to be a global campaign and topic around press freedom. So a good example of when something really is something bigger than actually your brand or business. It's a global topic. And then the Pride flag was published also last summer during the Pride, and we made our cover page as a Pride flag in order to support the sexual minority rights. And we got basically all the big Finnish companies to come along with us, so they published their logos there as well. And then finally there's the Suomi puhuu, which means Finland talks, and Philip is going to cover the German talk concept later, but we are now participating in it. So we are bringing together people that think differently on the topics that are relevant in the elections that are coming, parliamentary elections in 2 weeks. So Philip will talk about this concept more, and I will focus more today on the equality thing, the willingness to increase the percentage of women in Helsingin Sanomat.
Brilliant, thank you, Anu. You've been cued, Philip, to give us your perspective. Then, us answering the question: Can journalism make society kinder? I suspect I know what your answer might be.
Yeah. But first, thanks for the invitation. And I'm a special projects editor at Zeit Online, which is the website of Germany's weekly Die Zeit. And my answer to the question is yes. I absolutely believe that journalism can make societies kinder. And I think this has something to do with the role that journalism has in nowadays societies. More and more, I think in former days, we as journalists were more sender of information, and now we as a newsroom at Zeit Online, but other newsrooms as well, see us more than as a platform or a host for debate, more and more, not only, but more and more. And after the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit happening in the UK, we sat together in 2017 and came up with an idea how to address one of the problems that we think are most acute at the moment, and the problem of polarization and the problem of a growing disagreement between parts of the society. We see it in the US, but we can also see it in Germany and other European countries. And that was the starting point for an idea that started with an idea called Germany Talks, and this was again the starting point for a bigger international project called My Country Talks. And I will give you a short introduction. I hope the time is enough. So basically the idea that we had was, can we build something like a dating platform for political discourse? Can we build something like political Tinder? Can we build a platform where people meet that think totally different? And where they can meet for a one-on-one discussion in real life, for a coffee or for a pizza, and can we build such a platform? And that was the starting idea for our project Germany Talks. It started in 2017, and we built this little machine by asking our readers 5 yes or no questions. For example, did Germany take too many refugees? Which was a big question in Germany during the time. And when our readers have answered the questions, we then said, okay, thanks for your answer. We will try to find someone for you who thinks totally differently and who lives nearby. And we had no idea how many people would join this project and would register. We had 12,000 registrations at the beginning during the first round, and then 600 pairs meeting in 2017. And last year we did it again, and we had 28,000 people who registered for Germany Talks, the second round of Germany Talks. And what you can see behind me are all couples that met in Germany in 2018, 4,000 couples. They met in smaller places. They met in, as you can see, in Berlin and in bigger cities, and discussed about politics, which was, well, for a lot of these people an amazing or a very good experience. And after we did that, we received a lot of phone calls from media from other countries, and they asked us, hey, can we do that in our country? We would like to do it as well in Austria or in Switzerland, but also in Australia and even in Alaska. And so we decided to build an international platform out of it. It was funded by Google in 2018. Now it's ready, and it's used in a lot of countries at the moment. At the moment in more than 20 countries. And we have media partners in, I think, more than 40 media partners all over the world. And right now, and we are doing a project called Europe Talks. We are trying to bring together people in the whole Europe in the run-up of for the European election in May. And we collaborated with 16 media partners in 16 countries. And what you can see here are all participants so far. We are still collecting participants, but we have more than 20,000 people who already registered for this project. And for the first time, we don't want to match people who are neighbors, but we want to make cross-border matches. So if everything works out, we will match people from Finland with people in Italy, or with people in France, with people in Germany. Well, this is a map showing all planned events, My Country Talks events, at the moment. And before I stop, I'm a bit, I took too much time, I know. Just a short story, just to show you one of these thousands couples that already met. If we take all the numbers together, all the events that had already happened all around the world, we have more than 100,000 people meeting yet. And this is one couple from Germany. This is in Dresden. And on the left, you see a taxi driver. His name is Jens Blochwitz. and on the right you see Barbara Thiel, who is a retired engineer, and they met in Dresden, and of course they haven't known each other yet before. And the special thing about this conversation is that Jens Blauchwitz is a rights conservative. He's very skeptical about migration. He thinks Muslims and non-Muslims can't live together in a peaceful way. And Barbara Thiel is voting for the Green Party. And the special thing about this meeting was that Jens Blauchwitz took Barbara Thiel for a taxi ride. And they drove through Dresden, and he showed her high crime areas of Dresden and showed her the problems that he sees in this city. So this is just one example for thousands of stories that happened in these meetings since we started in 2017. And just the last slide, then I'm ready. We asked our readers to send selfies. These are some of them. Every couple that meets is asked to send a selfie. We received hundreds and thousands of these selfies, and still receiving these selfies. And we think these pictures are very, well, beautiful in a way, because you can see that these meetings have really an impact, or are special meetings for these people.
Brilliant, thank you so much. We started a bit later and we've had quite in-depth introduction, so I'm going to sort of just skip to some of the meatier questions to allow you also an opportunity to process it all, because it sounds really good, it sounds really positive, but you know, I'm sure that people sat here, and definitely people sat in newsrooms, maybe your own colleagues, who are saying, is this journalism? And, you know, should we be doing this? And if you, for each of the things that you're talking about, it seems somehow peripheral to our main objective, how do you answer that question? And then how do you structure this type of project work into either your team or your wider organization, or even your own schedule of work, so that it sits alongside the core work of journalism? Why don't we start with you, Roohi?
I mean, I think that it goes back to the very core of journalism. So ITV News, we say people at the very heart of our coverage. I think that when I think back to why I wanted to do this, what I was talking about was very much the people. So in terms of, you know, we are there to report on news stories, we are there to report on events, but we're looking at how it impacts people. And so when we're saying we're trying, you know, I showed examples, or some examples, of how I was saying, you know, it's helped make society kinder. That is part of a natural impact of what I call good journalism, responsible journalism, diverse journalism. And so one of my mentors, I asked him what he felt about your question, and he said, you know, journalism at its best when, you know, news coverage is sort of making people feel like they're not alone, or people, you know, when you're showing people often that they have shared values at a time when other, you know, other influences in their life may not. So just as some examples, when you were just talking about what we do in our daily practices or whatever, ITV News launched a digital show recently called Young British and Muslim. We also launched one called Ask a Woman. It was supposed to provide a platform with a longer time frame, half an hour, sometimes an hour, for voices that weren't being heard in the mainstream to have that. But at that same time, some of those same interviewees, we've had great feedback saying young voices are being heard. Some of those same interviewees we also bring across into our main programs as well. And some of the impact and things that we've actually heard, you know, we're not there to sort of influence government policy or authorities, but often by covering or uncovering news and showing the impact that it's having on people. We covered the story of an RAF medic with PTSD and other people with PTSD. We then often look at the impact that that has, and that can often be a way that it's influencing society perhaps for the better, in which we weren't part of it, but we weren't aiming for it, but it was part of that journey. And I think that is a way that we're sort of looking at what, I believe that those are the inherent values of what I see to be journalism.
So does that mean that, for example, if you do a program like that, which you could otherwise just do and put up, that you have an objective to then ask back, well, what has this done in terms of impact? How are people connecting with the story? Is that how you are sort of following up on it in a way that you might otherwise not do? You put the program out and that's the end.
Yes, I mean, we always ask for feedback, but we also ask not just from viewers' feedback, but we are asking from our contributors. So, for example, by covering for years, one of the best ways I think that we can be journalists is by listening and listening to our audience. And the next stories or the best stories always come from our audiences as well, I think. What are real people, real lives, what's going on behind closed doors in their living room, the impact of those daily issues. We're talking about Brexit right now all the time, but how is that trickling down into their real lives? And so we get the personal stories. The RAF medic said, speaking to us, helped change her life. She felt isolated behind her home. Lots of people reached out, not just to us, but to her, to say they were suffering too. A few weeks after a series I did on that subject years ago, the government decided to put in $250,000 into a charity that was helping those people. That new digital program we're doing, we're constantly asking for feedback, not just so we can improve it, but so we can feed that back into our main programs as well.
Philip, do you agree with that? This really nice statement, if I was in the audience, I'd tweet it, which is, journalism is about making people feel like they're not alone. It seems very much that that is what Germany Talks is about doing, but is that journalism?
Yeah. Well, I totally agree to the statement, but also I think, I mean, like we are very often asked, why do you do that? I mean, like it's obviously, it's not our primary role to bring people together for a political debate like we do it. But I think it is journalism, and the Zeit, my newspaper, has a long tradition of initiating debates. But it was a more elitist debate. I mean, like we had like a long tradition of cultural and political debates. But these were intellectuals that did this debate, and now we took these debates to the people. So I think we are in line with our tradition, in line with our idea of journalism. So I would definitely say yes. And as I said, I think we are more and more a host. We try to be more and more a host for political debate, and I think modern newsrooms are perfect in this role. To host debates, to moderate them, and so I think yes, it's journalism.
What about you, Anu? And what does that look like when you're structuring your work? If you do think that this is journalism, how do you make the case as a managing editor for these sorts of projects?
Well, increasing the amount of women and fighting for gender equality in journalism is definitely journalism, because we should reflect, the aim is to reflect the society better, and also it's not only that we reflect the society as it is, journalism also creates like its own reality. So we should be very aware of our own biases. I can read you 2 comments. This is one of, obviously we have been getting a lot of feedback, and when we announced our goal to increase the amount of women, this is one of the comments that I got from readers, a very like civilized, bright one. I know him from he told me what he does for his work, so he's a very bright man, and he wrote me, so we've come to the point where feminism actually beats journalistic principles. Why do you want to distort the reality? Journalism should look for and tell the biggest news and stories, and it's natural that they are and will always be dominated by men. Wow. And this other comment that came also from a bright guy inside our newsroom, he said, this is a very good initiative, but men run states and companies, climb up the mountains, write bestsellers, build submarines, and murder women inside those submarines. Very few women do these things. So these are, of course, there was a lot of positive feedback, but this is actually...
You didn't want to murder him in a submarine after that?
No, but I think this was a very good beginning for a discussion inside the newsroom, because we should be aware of our own biases. We can easily say that, okay, it's obvious that the politics and economic news are dominated by men. But when you actually look at the statistics, 42% of the Finnish parliament, the females are representing 42%. 35% of our ministers are feminine, and from the European Parliament, Finnish members, actually 62% are women. So how come we only have 15, or had 1 year ago 15 to 20% of women in the economic and politics section? So we should fight against our own biases, understand them, and understand the conventions that we don't. There's a lot of female expertise around various topics, but we have the convention of interviewing men.
Yep. Do you want to jump in, Roohi?
Yeah, I was just going to say just something on what Philip said, and also Anu. One is, I feel as journalists, first of all, I know it was following on from what you were saying, Philip, we don't, I believe, don't tell people what to say. It's reporting on facts and things going on. My focus by talking about people and showing what's going on was to talk about it's then allowing people to make up their own mind. But it's that we don't often hear from those people. So, for example, when we were using the word refugees, and refugees are, so many are coming to this country and to Europe and other things. We did the story of one 18-year-old boy who had arrived from Syria, and his story, and just heard from him, and how he was actually trying to he had big plans now that he arrived in England, and he actually wanted to help other refugees. But it was just humanising and then it's up to the viewer what they decide to, but it was just putting a name and face to the word refugee, rather than just this scary idea sometimes of refugees. And just what Anu was just talking about with gender, the same thing which I mentioned, which I go around mentoring young people and also talking to young people about joining the media. There is this idea that mainstream media often is not something that young people can aspire to, and especially from certain socioeconomic groups and certain minorities. But then we're getting into this vicious circle where newsrooms want to diversify themselves, but then the very communities that we want to represent aren't joining. So it's really important that, the language and stories that we tell are important, because not to alienate others, and then equally that we reach out to them and show them the stories that we're doing, so that they feel it's something that they would like to come and work for as well. Because often it is fear of the unknown on both sides that leads to the misunderstanding.
So we've heard about journalists trying to use their platforms to get people to change what people think about, if they cannot directly influence what people think. And actually then journalists saying, actually, we won't even do that work for you, we'll get you to try and do it to each other, where you hear each other's perspectives. What are your thoughts on this? We'd be very happy to hear whether you think we're all wasting our time and should we go back to death, destruction, and disease, telling the real stories that we see in the world. Do you have any questions for our speakers? Because I have a ton more, but I know that we only have an hour together, so I'd really like to open it up to the floor now. If you want any further clarifications, any questions, or if you yourself are thinking about these sorts of things in your own organizations and would like tips. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I would like some tips. Tips for freelance journalists, particularly when you're writing about topics in the area of sort of social injustices. It sounds like what you're saying is focus on personal impact as a way to get readers to have more empathy and be kinder a bit. Any other tips would be well appreciated.
Okay, let's see if we can take any more together. Sorry, what was your name?
Linda.
Linda, thank you. Just because we'll take a few together. There's one at the back there, please. If you could just introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, my name's Lotte. I work for Deutsche Welle in Berlin. How can we avoid being patronizing?
Very good question. And then at the third from the front, please.
Hi, Flip from ABC in Australia. I'm just curious with Philip, your project is growing, obviously. How do you turn those conversations into stories, and what do you envision you telling from these conversations?
Great question, thank you. Okay, so we have tips particularly for freelancers. I think that's a really unique perspective also, because the challenge of trying to sell stories into newsrooms, the need for this sort of commitment often has to come from the top down. None of these things could happen without sort of like senior management buy-in. Who would like to take that one? Well, I think you look like you were looking at Roohi specifically, and then we'll divvy up the rest.
Yeah, actually, my answer to you was actually tied into the next one about patronising, ironically. But so some of the work I do work on specials and series, so they tend to be on off-diary stories, but often on stories that are also what I call really important. So I'm currently looking at PTSD in the military, for example. But it can often be on the main news stories of the day. So when I was covering Syria intensely, it was our viewers are seeing one crisis non-stop. But how do you avoid them glazing over or not caring or it becoming a distant thing? So yes, that's sort of the human impact, the faces, the names, but also looking, I mean, if you're pitching stories, to look at what issues and stories are of the day and current. So there are times when, right now, if there is sort of Brexit going on or other things will be fighting against that agenda. So if you're trying to pitch, I would say, look at what issues are facing, you know, that are sort of going on at the time, but then it's the angle on that or the focus on that. And I always feel that sometimes when everyone's talking about the sort of the top end of the story, it's about finding out how it's impacting the community and the real people. And why it sort of ties into your question is that I feel that the main thing where I hope that in everything we're doing, and I know sometimes when the question kindness and this, it all may sound a little sort of, that we're focusing on one aspect. To me, it's listening to our audience and listening to our readers, which I said at the very beginning. And that is from even when I covered the Paralympics, and I have a colleague in the newsroom who's a wheelchair user, I literally was asking her, because it's, if we assume we know everything, then we are in the worst position. And so it's asking colleagues, if we don't have colleagues in the newsroom that reflect that, then look outside. I was talking to Eliza before this about reverse mentoring. You know, for big stories like Paris climate talks, we had experts come in and talk to our newsroom. Well, if we don't have people in our newsroom who reflect stories every day, like racism, terrorism, knife crime, currently, you know, HAP, austerity, Islamophobia, all of those, we should have people come in and talk to us so we're hearing them. So we either, you know, obviously I read social media reactions to our pieces, we're all doing that, we're going out and filming, we're listening, but sometimes it may not be enough. And so we have these diversity panels we do at ITV, and so it's good to hear sometimes bluntly and harshly from our audience how we've done, and be willing to listen and be willing to sort of act from those things as well.
Anu, do you want to take the question on, because I could see the risk with this, with particularly like billboards and anything that doesn't allow for nuance. How do you avoid being patronizing? Oh, well, yes, you need some water, please. And then how can we be kinder? We will wait while Anu drinks water so that we don't. Yes, please, let's do that. Take your time. Okay. Philip, then, there was a question directly to you. How does this turn into stories for your work?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, we do have, are you okay?
Yeah, just, yeah.
First of all, we do have contact details of all our participants. So what we do is we send out reporters. We ask some of the couples if we can join the conversation. With some of the couples, we did video interviews before and after. We asked them about their expectations. And of course, we did data stories, because it's also very interesting to see like how 28,000 people answer to political questions of our time, and to see how different, for example, women and men answer. And one interesting point I would like to share is that in nearly every event we did so far, the biggest difference when it comes to the political questions were between young women and old men, which is very, very interesting, and it's really we see it in every country we are doing this project. So there's something, we feel there's something also in the data, some truth in the data.
Anu, how are you feeling? We would like you to thrive, not just survive, Anu. Can you manage?
Sorry, I have this terrible flu. So what was the question? How to avoid patronizing women?
Yes. Well, avoid patronizing whichever group you're talking about, right? So I'm assuming people who are patronized often sort of withdraw rather than engage, or who feel patronized. So how do you avoid it, particularly when there's no scope for nuance with,
Yeah. Yes. So basically, I think with the gender thing in Nordic countries where the equality is kind of very advanced, we don't have that risk of patronizing women. But of course, or at least we shouldn't. I mean, if we are, then we should look at the mirror in the mirror. So, but obviously we have to, like the big discussion, the big negative feedback around the topic was like people were thinking that now somehow if we increase the women or the female expertise, like interview women from the expert point of view, it would mean like there's less expertise in the media, which is a silly thought, since like female women are as educated as men in the Nordic countries and elsewhere.
Sorry, can I just
also
ask to clarify?
Yeah.
So people are thinking that if you go specifically to find female commentators, then you're reducing the quality of the commentating.
Yeah. That was
right.
We got a lot of feedback saying this, and so this is absurd. And of course, I think avoiding patronizing women is to see actually the role of the women. It's not enough if we have like 50-50 percentage if we don't look at the roles that women and men have in the content. So we don't seek for gender balance that is just gender balance in the percentage. We have to see the roles there, and of course then looking at one equality meter or measuring it not automatically, but has widened our perspective so that we actually nowadays talk about more of all the background that people have, different kind of, and diversity from many points of view. So I think that's against the patronizing then.
Okay, let's see if we can grab a few more in, because we've got about 5 minutes left. Yes, just said that. And if you have any other questions, can we see if any other thoughts from the floor? No? Yes, there are a couple. Thank you. Let's start with the lady at the front and with the gentleman at the back.
Hi, I'm Mette. I'm a fellow at Constructive Institute, and my question is probably most for you, that some of the things that you showed could be maybe from traditional journalists looked upon as activism, and how have you had any reactions to that, and how do you deal with that, and where do the panel think the line is between being active journalism, also talking about the role that you were talking about in Germany, and being an activist?
Thank you.
Yes, that is a very good question. And
Anu, can we just take both? And
yeah,
then
sure.
Can answer them first, because we won't get the time to come back to that question. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my question's for the guy from Zeit. I actually signed up for your initiative, but more out of a sense of voyeurism than anything about kindness. I was just wondering what the philosophy behind your question, behind your initiative was, because it sounds a little bit Facebook, if you know what I mean. Connectivity is good, but is that what was the motivation behind it? Because you could just be giving nasty people a platform to meet others, or to have some uncomfortable experiences. So what have the results been, as well as what is the philosophy behind it?
Okay, and panelists, as you take those last questions and comments, I feel like that yours was also to everybody, which is, being an active, sort of engaged journalist / citizen and becoming an activist. But as you answer, because we won't have the time to, can you just conclude by telling everybody what's next for the projects that you're working on, and because we won't have the time to come back to it. So, and if they want more information, where they can go to get that. Perhaps we can start with you, Anu, and then we'll finish with Roohi.
Yeah, we have been going on this path, like doing acts in the society for a year and a half, more or less. And it was, of course, an active decision, but it's a good question whether it's journalism or activism. And we have decided to take the path where we actually, we are journalists, but we also stand for the values and act according to them in the society. But I know there are newsrooms that are against these kind of campaigns or whatever. But this is something that we also communicate openly and transparently to the readers, and this is kind of our way of doing it.
And what are you doing next? Can you reveal who you're going to be? Are there any other despotic leaders coming to town, maybe, who you're going to put on a billboard, or what's coming next for this sort of work at your organization?
You never know. We did the campaign for Trump and Putin summit in less than 2 weeks, because obviously we just got the news that they are coming just 2 weeks before. So anyways, yes, we will continue with this. Next will be probably this Europe talks that we are into also now. So we have very good results from the Finland talks concept, and we are continuing with the Europe talks now.
Okay. Great, thank you. Philip?
Just to answer the question about what is the philosophy of Germany Talks. When we started it, well, we read some studies, and there's some hope among scientists that if you bring people together for a one-on-one discussion and they think differently, or maybe they are part of different groups of the society, that you may have a decrease of stereotype thinking, for example. And we had a lot of hopes, and we thought, okay, maybe just try. And now for the second round of Germany Talks, we had scientists in doing research, and it's not published yet, so I can't tell you in detail what they wrote. But what I can say is that that the results are very, very promising, in a way that we can see that some of the hopes that we have, for example, reducing stereotypes among two groups of the society, that we can see that this decrease actually happens. So we are not so sure if this really changes the whole society and if everybody went out of this as a new person or whatever, but we think there are certain effects.
And what's happening? What's coming next?
Oh yes, I'm doing something else now. I'm not really doing something else. I'm still in. We were working on this Europe Talks project, on the My Country Talks projects. We try to further internationalize the project this year and next year. But I'm also now trying to start a digital magazine at the Zeit, a magazine that is not printed. It's digital only, but it follows the rules of print publications, and it's mainly about long reads, and yeah, so it's back to text again.
Okay, and lastly, Roohi.
Just on the campaign front, I think it's really important that, because I mentor young people into journalism, we're on this judging competition, and we're always telling them, some of them come in so passionately about one issue, that we're watching to see whether they come up with that key idea of balance, and that's what's it. During all our Syria coverage, the locals would ask, why every day do we say they're claiming that, this, that? They would get quite offended, and I'd say because we're not there, and we're having to say, it's all the usual. During all of our other coverage, it's making sure we're reflecting the other side, and that's leaving it to the viewer. But just one of our pieces that did go out, by the way, from Syria was shown by a German TV station. They contacted us to say that the feedback from their viewers, who were at the time quite mixed about the refugees' arrival, was a positive one. So sometimes what happens is a not direct effect, but it's not a planned one, but it's not a campaigning one, and absolutely I don't think journalism should be campaigning. Just on the final one of what we're doing, I'm continuing to works to both diversify our newsroom, both on the inside, continuing to do the journalism we do, which is to be, I literally, I've said it during this talk as well, I think the best stories come from being out and about in our communities and hearing what they have to say, and then asking them to tell us in their own words, and that's something that's really, really important. The thing I was going to mention before was someone tweeted actually to say, "Dear journalist, said to someone, when you call and tell me that you'd want me to be your interviewee, but you've already decided the soundbite that I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to say no. And that's what often sometimes can happen maybe in her experience, and she chose to tweet that. And that's something that I always take on board. And the other is, as I go outside and speak in schools, universities and communities, is to create less of a fear of that media, and so that, and realizing that we are, you know, the words and language we use and the stories we tell are impacting on them. And if we're talking about wanting diversity, then it's sort of, it is a two-way street. And I hope that we can increase some of that representation within our newsrooms, as Anu mentioned as well, because it can only help our coverage, our news, the way we tell it, to make it the best it can be, and make it the most accurate and rich it can be as well.
Thank you, guys. We know it's the last day of the English-speaking program at IJF. We know that you had lots of other options for where you could spend your time, and you chose to spend it with us. So thank you, and thank you to the panelists. I'll close with Anu's